Hi guys, so I'm here today to do a book haul. I have quite a fair stack of books, so I don't want to dilly-dally too much before showing them to you, but I have to say this has been a really bad month for me. May wasn't great either, but June was particularly bad, and one of the things that has brought me a lot of comfort and one of the things I've done to kind of try and distract myself is go book shopping. So I have picked up more of these myself than I usually would have, but you know, if that's what helps when things aren't going that great, then I don't mind so much, and I know I'm going to get through them all because I am consuming books quite speedily at the moment, again because things aren't that great, and I find it sometimes that when life is really hard I get consumed in fiction, particularly fantasy, and I've been reading a lot of fantasy recently and bought a lot of fantasy recently, so I'm really excited about all these books and to show them to you all. But I do have a few that aren't fantasy, don't worry if you're not into fantasy. So without further ado, let's get into them, shall we? So the first book was actually a gift from a family friend, Linda, who is like family to me, and she bought me a copy of The Darkest Part of the Forest by Holly Black. Now you might have seen in my last reading wrap up that I recently read Holly Black's most recent novel, The Cruel Prince, which is the first in a series and it's set in the fairy world. This book is an earlier book by Holly Black which also deals with fairies. I've already read this one, so I will talk about it in my up and coming reading wrap up. I enjoyed this. I think I enjoyed The Cruel Prince more though, but it is a fun story. It's a young adult novel about a teenage girl who lives in Fairfold, which is this town that has a strong tie to the world of the fae. And actually one of her good friends is a changeling of a fairy child that was left with human parents when he was a baby. So there's a real connection between the real world and the fairy world. The lines are very much blurred in this town and things are getting blurrier. Big things are happening and the fairy world is encroaching more and more on the real world in this story, and she has to deal with that, and she plays a role in that, and it is a good fun adventure story, although it was a little tropey in moments, but I will let you know more of my thoughts in my wrap up. I then picked myself up two books in Fop. I think I've mentioned in book hauls before, but Fop is a record store here in the UK that also sell a selection of books, and their books are usually 2 for £5. So I picked up 2 in there. The first one I could not believe they had. I do manage to find quite a few good books in Fop, but I was almost about to buy this book full price the day before, so I was so pleased to see it, and that is Lavinia by Ursula K. Le Guin. So Ursula K. Le Guin is quite famous for writing fantasy and science fiction. She wrote The Left Hand of Darkness and The Wizard of Earthsea, which I think are some of her quite famous works, and I have read half of The Wizard of Earthsea and didn't fall in love with it at the time, although it's a book I would like to try again because I might just not have been in the right headspace for it, and I have a lot of interest in reading some of her other books, particularly Lavinia, because Lavinia is based on Greek and Roman mythology. It centres on a young girl called Lavinia who is Princess of Latium, and she is destined to marry Aeneas, who is a young Trojan man and whose destiny is to eventually found the city of Rome. Yeah, the prophecies say that that is what he will do after the fall of Troy. I am loving my myth retellings at the moment. I am loving my fantasy at the moment. I am loving classic fantasy at the moment, so I'm really excited to read this story that Ursula K. Le Guin has written, set in that kind of mythological antiquity that I love so much. In order to get my 2 books for £5, I also picked up Heroes and Villains by Angela Carter. This is a collection of short stories by Angela Carter, who is queen of weird, wonderful, magical short stories, and I've read and loved many of her short stories in the past. The Bloody Chamber is a collection that retells fairy tales, including Bluebeard, which is the title story, and I've been meaning to read more of her short stories, so I thought I would pick up another collection of them. Angela Carter's prose are stunning, so I have no doubt I'm going to love this collection. On the topics of antiquity and Greek mythology, however, I do want to mention 2 books that were sent to me by publishers, and the first one is The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. I am so excited about this book. As soon as I learned that it was coming out, I was so pumped. It doesn't come out until the 30th of August, so it is a little while to wait, and I was very fortunate to have been sent a proof copy by Penguin, who are publishing it, but this is a retelling of Euripides' Trojan Women, which is a play set after the fall of Troy, in which the women of Troy are being dished out amongst the Greek victors, the Greek heroes, and their lives are obviously falling apart, and they're dealing with the aftermath of war, the loss of their husbands, their fathers, their children, and their new lives as slaves to the people that conquered them. And it's a very emotive play, so having a whole novel centered around the experiences of those women, I think, is going to be so powerful, and I'm so excited to see Pat Barker bring that to life in a much chunkier form than a play. So I'm just really excited for this. I've heard amazing things about Pat Barker as a writer, although I've not read her before, so I trust that she's done this justice. And I was then sent another book by Bloomsbury, which I wasn't expecting to get in the post, but as soon as I read the back, I knew I had to read it. And that is The Pisces by Melissa Broder. This is a novel set now, and it follows a PhD student working in the field of classics. I was like, that's me. Although she is researching Sappho, who was a Greek poet, which is not the same as my research, but instantly when I read a book that's about a PhD student studying classics, I knew I was going to read it. But then it just gets even weirder, because it is actually a romance novel between the main character, who's just gone through a breakup and is finding life a bit of a struggle, and she meets a merman. And I believe that's the beginning of a romantic relationship, which just sounds so wacky but so intriguing to me. I've not read anything like that before, so I'm really excited to check this one out and see what I'm in store for. The next two books I actually picked up in a second-hand bookshop when I went out with my friend Jill on one of my nice relaxing book shopping trips, and the first one is Memoirs of a Space Woman by Naomi Mitchison. This is a short science fiction novella that was released by the Women's Press and written by Naomi Mitchison, who is a Scottish author. She was writing in the 1900s, and again she wrote fantasy and science fiction and made quite a stamp on those genres. And I have read a third of one of her fantasy books before that's actually set also in antiquity, but was not in the right headspace, so I need to go back to it and start from the beginning, because it's a book I was enjoying and would really like to experience properly. But when I saw that they had this tiny little science fiction book by her, I thought that might be a really great way to check out her writing, because the other book I was reading was quite chunky. So I read the back and it sounded really interesting, and I thought I'd give it a shot. It's about a woman on a spaceship coming in contact with various different alien races. I believe she has some romantic entanglements and just learns a lot about different people, so I'm sure it's going to be really interesting. Both of these books were £2.50 by the way, which I think is pretty good. And the next one was Dragonflight, the first in the Dragons of Perun Chronicles by Mccaffrey. This is a book I've been meaning to pick up for years. If you know me, you know I love dragons, love fantasy with dragons at the centre of it, and this is a big book in the dragon genre. It's pretty famous. I've seen it multiple times. I've just never gotten around to picking up the first one. This is one of those dragon rider stories where humans are paired with dragons and they become dragon riders and they have a very close bond. However, the dragon species is at risk at the moment because the queen is dying and she has only one egg left and they need a queen. So really interested to start this series because it obviously has made quite a marker on the genre. It's pretty famous and I hear a lot of good things about it. My camera battery's flashing and I still have so many books. Okay, so let's not dilly-dally. The next two books I bought myself are more fantasy, and the first one is Shadowfell by Juliette Marillier. I have just read two other books by this author and loved them, so needed more. I have become her new biggest super fan and I wanted more by her. She's a fantasy author and luckily for me she has written a ton of books, and this one is the first in a series. I don't actually know terribly what it's about. I just bought it because I knew I was a big fan of Juliette Marillier. Now it says, its name is spoken only in whispers, and the people of Alban dare to speak it at all. Shadowfell, the training ground for rebels seeking to free their land from the grip of the tyrannical king, is so shrouded in mystery that most believe it to be a myth. But for Nerin, Shadowfell's existence is her only hope. She's penniless, orphaned and utterly alone, and concealing a treacherous magical power that will warrant her immediate enslavement should she be revealed. Sounds amazing. I'm so up for that. High fantasy, loads of magic at the moment, it's all I want. And on that topic, I also picked up A Catawitch by Nnedi Okorafor. This is the first in a series by the author, and I recently read The first two in Nnedi Okorafor's science fiction series beginning with Binti, and I'm planning on reading the third one very soon. So wanted both more by the author but also some fantasy in this case as opposed to science fiction. And I've seen this described as the African Harry Potter. I mean, every fantasy book is compared to Harry Potter, so I'm not going to let that prejudice me in any way going into this or affect my reading, because I already know I love Nnedi Okorafor's writing, so I'm sure this is a phenomenal standalone series that doesn't need to be compared to Harry Potter. But it is centred around a young girl who discovers she's a witch and goes to be trained in using her powers. Our main character was born in New York but lives now in Nigeria and is actually albino. So yeah, I think this is just going to be fantastic given my experience with Nnedi Okorafor's writing in the past. The next book I was also sent by Penguin, and that is in honour of Pride Month, and that is The Miseducation of Cameron Post by Emily M. Damforth. This is the story of a young gay woman who I believe is sent to a camp by her family to fix the gayness in her. Something that unfortunately has and still happens, and I think this book is going to be both upsetting and powerful, and I've heard amazing things, so I'm really excited for it. I also picked up 3 more books on different shopping trips with my friend Jill, who is my favourite person to go book shopping with, and the first one is a children's book that I've been hearing rave reviews about, and that is Nevermore, The Trials of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This is the first in a children's book series which has again been compared to Harry Potter, but more in its appeal to the same demographic, I believe. On the back it reads, Morrigan Crow is cursed, destined to die on her 11th birthday, but as the clock strikes midnight she's whisked away by a remarkable man called Jupiter North and taken to the secret city of Nevermore. There she's invited to join the Wondrous Society. Mystery, magic and protection are hers if she can only pass 4 impossible trials using an exceptional talent which she doesn't have. And again, like I said, people have been raving about this book, but I also recently saw Mercedes talk about it and she enjoyed it, and if Mercedes says it's good, then it's got to be good. I also picked up The Falling Woman by Pat Murphy. This is one of Orion's fantasy masterworks collection, which are republishing of classic fantasy novels, obviously. And this one appealed to me because it's about an archaeologist. It's about an archaeologist and her daughter, who she has a bit of an estranged relationship with, and they are on an archaeological dig dealing with the Mayan culture when they uncover, I believe, a magical priestess from the Mayans. I'm not sure, something like that, but they basically tap into the kind of magical past of this site, so I'm excited to see how that comes to be. I love a book about archaeology and history and magic, and because it's been published in these fantasy masterworks, I'm sure it's a pretty good example of the genre. And lastly with Jill, I also picked up a non-fiction book, and that is The Life and Rhymes of Benjamin Zephaniah by Benjamin Zephaniah. This is Benjamin Zephaniah's autobiography. He is an activist and a poet amongst many other things, and he's a poet I have been a fan of since I was a child. I adore his children's and his adult poetry. I admire his dedication to the causes he believes in, and just find him a very interesting person. So I'm really excited to read more about his life. It's reminded me that I'd like to read more of his poetry collections. I've read 2 of his adult collections in the past, but would like to read more. And I'm just intrigued to learn about how he became the man he is today, kind of his journey as a poet and an artist and an activist. And yeah, I'm really excited for this one. Actually, since I just mentioned another fantasy masterworks book, I thought I'd briefly mention a book that I have reserved at the library. It's ready for me to go and pick up. I just can't do it today because my library's closed, so I'm going to be doing that tomorrow, but I thought I would mention it because I will be reading it soon, since it's going to be on loan from the library, and it is another fantasy novel, and that is The Forgotten Beasts of Eld by Patricia A. McKillip. So I read another book by Patricia A. McKillip, The Thorn Alphabet, very recently and loved it. It was just fantasy at its best. It was so magical and wonderful, and I really adored it. So I looked and checked if my library had any more by her, and they did. They had The Forgotten Beasts of Eld, is that what I said it was called? Yes. So I've reserved that and I'm going to go pick it up. It says it's about Sybil, the beautiful great-granddaughter of the wizard Heald, has grown up on Eld Mountain with only the fantastic beasts summoned there by wizardry as companions. She cares nothing for humans until when she is 16, a baby is brought for her to raise, a baby who awakens emotions that she has never known before. But the baby is Tamlorn, the only son of King Dread, and inevitably Sybil becomes entangled in the human world of love, war and revenge, and only her beasts can save her from her ultimate destruction. Like I mentioned, I thought the other book I read by this author was just beautifully written, so well constructed, wonderful, classic fantasy that I trust that I will enjoy whatever else she has written. I then have a science fiction book which I was sent by the publishers, and that is Brightly Burning by Alexa Dawn. This is published by Titan Books and it is a retelling of Jane Eyre set in space. It's a science fiction retelling of Jane Eyre. So I was sold on that description alone. I thought that sounded like a lot of fun, especially since I'm reading a lot of science fiction and fantasy at the moment. I wanted to give it a shot. Stella, the equivalent to our Jane Eyre character, goes to work for the Rochester family, and I will say no more because you know what Jane Eyre's about, but it's set in space. And then lastly, for books I was sent, I have The Perfect Mother by Amy Malloy, a novel which was included in my Page Habit subscription box. I was also sent a children's picture book by Thames and Hudson, which is so beautiful, so gorgeous, and that is Petra by Mariana Coppo, and it's about a stone. I love a beautiful children's book. It's about this little rock called Petra, and the illustrations are just stunning. It just says on the back, is Petra a mountain, an egg, an island? Who knows? She's a rock and this is how she rolls. But I have to say, I like reading a children's picture book now and then. I think they're really cute and I really appreciate good illustration and good design work, so I just think this is gorgeous and I'm really thankful that Thames and Hudson sent it to me, which is a subscription box I am sent for free. And what is fun about Page Habit is that all of the books in their boxes come annotated with sticky notes by the author, so you get like a little bit of extra insight into the book as you're reading, and I think that's a lot of fun. This was the mystery box for the previous month, and it's about a group of young mothers who like get together to relax and take time away from their children when one of the mother's babies is stolen. So that is the premise of the mystery and the thriller. The books in this box are usually kind of literary mysteries, are usually very well written and well constructed, so I'm definitely intrigued to find out what's going on here. If you're interested in Page Habit, I always link it down below when I mention it, and I also have a code which gives you $5 off your first box. But lastly for this video, I will mention the one book that I did buy on my Kindle, and that is the last book in Nnedi Okorafor's Binti trilogy, which is The Night Masquerade. So like I mentioned, I read Binti and the sequel Binti Home, which I adored. I gave them both 5 out of 5 stars, and I'm just so excited to come to the end of Binti's story. I'm kind of sad to come to the end of Binti's story, but also to find out kind of how things wrap up in the trilogy, what happens next. We were kind of left on a cliffhanger at the end of the second novel, so I'm definitely desperate to find out what happens there and just how Binti's story unfolds, and hopefully there's some kind of resolution at the end and something quite satisfying for me as a reader. But I love this series. It's about Binti, who at the beginning of the first novel leaves her home to attend Umza University, which is on another planet, and she's the first of her people ever to leave Earth and go to Umza University. But lots happens. It's very dramatic, very fast-paced in a sense, you know, the action is quite rich, but the character development is also very rich, so that's a wonderful combination. But those are all the books I have recently acquired. I am so excited to be surrounded by all these wonderful fantasy and science fiction books because, like I mentioned, I'm just finding a lot of comfort and distraction in them when I need them at the moment, because life has just been quite difficult recently. But I am really pleased with everything I have, and I am just so excited. All I want to do today is just go and read my fantasy novels, although I do have some chores to do as well. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of these books I've mentioned. If you've read any of them or you're interested in any of them, please do leave a comment down below, and any fantasy or science fiction book recommendations would be greatly appreciated. But until next time guys, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!